Since the 19th century, Venezuela has legitimately claimed the Essequibo Guyana, a territory of almost 160, 0 miles minus 2, located between the west of the Essequibo River and the landmark of the top of Mount Roraima. Although by right it belongs to Venezuela, as the oldest maps attest to this. The territory is currently administered by the Republic of Guyana. Problems and confrontations between both countries. To better understand the origin of this controversial territorial claim that is still in effect today, we will review its history. This is Alejandro Andrade speaking from the New Encyclopedia. I invite you to follow us on our Instagram account, which you can find in the description. Due to the monumental discovery of Christopher Columbus in 1492, Spain held the right to be the first occupying and discovering empire of America. In 1498, Admiral Columbus first sighted the Venezuelan mainland. And since then, Venezuela, made up of a set of provinces of the monarchy, included the territory of the Essequibo Guyana within the province of Guyana. In the 16th century, the province of Guyana came to encompass what we now know as Essequibo, Guyana, and Suriname. Venezuela possessed all this territory with international recognition from the other European powers. However, the Netherlands began to invade Venezuelan Guyana lands in 1623, decades later in 1648. Spain and the Netherlands signed the Treaty of Münster, which stipulated that neither of the two countries should aspire to possess the territory dominated by the other. Through this peace treaty, Spain recognized the territories that the Netherlands had occupied in America. At the time of signing this treaty, the Spanish domination extended to the Essequibo River, so the Dutch did not possess any territory to the west of the river. All of the Essequibo territory belonged to Venezuela. And indeed, when the General Captaincy of Venezuela was created, it brought together all the Venezuelan provinces under a single political and military command for the first time. The royal decree includes the Essequibo in the Venezuelan territory. But the English, Guyanese, and other opponents to the Venezuelan claim have stated that the Essequibo only belonged to Jura of the Captaincy. Because, according to this version, the Spanish domination never actually extended to the Essequibo River. This version is far from reality. It was Alonso Ojeda who first explored the coasts of the province of Guyana, from the Amazon to the Orinoco River, and who first took possession of these lands in the name of the Crown of Spain. After his first excursion, numerous Spanish expeditions followed up the Orinoco River into the interior of Guyana. They made their strongholds by other tributary rivers of the Atlantic as well. The Essequibo River, located in its estuary, is named after Juan de Esquivel, lieutenant of Diego Columbus. He was the grandson of Christopher Columbus, and in 1576, 160 Spaniards led by Don Pedro Malaber de Silva landed on the coast between the Essequibo and Hoyapoco rivers. And for 1615, years after the Dutch invasion of Guayana province, the Spaniards remained, farming the land with the indigenous people. In the 1700s, Spain expanded its control over the region. They established a fortified post on the Curumo River. The territorial dominion between the Orinoco and the Essequibo rivers became fully effective. They also continued their missions in the region. Therefore, it is clear that Spain did occupy the Essequibo, and that the name of the Essequibo River comes from the Castilian language we speak, not from Anglo-Dutch. A new threat, more dangerous than the Dutch for the eastern border of Venezuela, appeared in 1814, when, through the Treaty of London, Holland ceded its possessions in America to Great Britain. At that time, Venezuelans were fighting a bloody civil war for independence, a situation that was taken advantage of by the English settlers to advance west of the Essequibo River. These eager gold seekers came to occupy some lands on the lower coast of the Maruca and Pomeroon rivers. However, the patriots did not stand idly by. In 1822, the liberator Simón Bolívar ordered his minister in London that these settlers either had to be put under protection and obedience to Colombian laws, or they had to withdraw to their former possessions. And despite the fact that Great Britain recognized the independence of Gran Colombia, with its eastern border on the Essequibo River, the English did not withdraw their settlers from the usurped lands. To the west of the river, on the contrary, they continued to expand over Venezuelan territory. During this initial stage of the English usurpation, the incursion of greatest historical significance for the territorial conflict was carried out by Robert Schomburgk, a Prussian explorer commissioned by the London Geographical Society to inspect the area of the British colony of Guyana. As a result of his work, the explorer designed multiple maps. However, in the first map he designed, the naturalist acknowledged that the Venezuelan territory reached the Esequibo River. It was the only gesture of honesty known from the explorer, because afterwards he dedicated himself to designing new maps, and each one turned out to be more arbitrary than the previous one. The most blatant of all, published in 1840, indicated that the eastern border of Venezuela was located 141,930 square kilometers west of the Essequibo River. Unfortunately for Venezuela, the British government published it, and shortly thereafter the borders marked on the map were adopted as definitive by the British. In 1841, the Prussian explorer was sent from New America, starting his work in Punta Barima, a place adjacent to the Orinoco River. But his presence sparked a strong protest from the government of José Antonio Páez. Thanks to the diplomatic efforts of Alejo Fotik, the British government was persuaded to tear down the boundary posts placed by Schomburgk during his journey. In 1850, the Venezuelan government achieved another apparent diplomatic victory, signing an agreement with Great Britain that stipulated that neither of the two countries should occupy the disputed territory. However, the English usurpation was just beginning, and they had not yet shown everything they were capable of doing. The years following the signing of this treaty were not at all easy for Venezuela. The disputed territory, blessed with vast natural resources, aroused a strong greed in the British settlers that no treaty managed to extinguish. Aspiring to usurp more Venezuelan territory, the British continued to advance in the Essequibo, Guyana, and even tried to create an autonomous movement in Ciudad Bolívar, with the aim of separating that city from the country and integrating it into British Guyana. And as if that were not enough, they also set their expansionist sights on the Apura state. British mining companies were the main ones responsible for the violation of the mutual agreement. Respect for the pressure they exerted to enrich themselves even more. Faced with this new pressing foreign threat, the diplomat José María Rojas, Minister of Antonio Guzmán Blanco, proposed in 1881 a limit that would freely cede part of the Venezuelan territory to avoid greater losses to the British. However, the president disavowed this proposal, and the British, aspiring to reach the Orinoco River, also did not accept it. In 1887, the British government published a new map in which they insisted on the illegitimate claim of thousands of square kilometers west of the Essequibo River. During the last years of the 19th century, the voracity of British imperialism reached its peak. Without any legal historical basis, they came to demand up to 203,310 square kilometers of Venezuelan territory. Accustomed to receiving no military response from Venezuela, the British settlers decided to forcibly take the overwhelming arbitrary demarcation.
In January of 1895, several British soldiers occupied a Venezuelan military post located on the Cuyuni River.
They planted their flag and hoisted it in front of the town of El Dorado. But they did not expect the formidable reaction of Domingo Antonio Sifontes, a brave soldier native to the area, who defeated the advance. He arrested the invaders and sent them tied up to the jail in Ciudad Bolívar. Sifontes' defense of Venezuelan sovereignty, historically known as the Cuyuni River Incident, had significant international repercussions. Following the Monroe Doctrine, the American Secretary of State sent a note to the British government informing the power that the territorial dispute should be resolved through arbitration. After 2 years of negotiations, the United States and Great Britain reached an agreement. Both parties imposed on Venezuela, through coercion, an arbitration treaty in 1897, which did not conform to international law. During 1899, the controversial arbitration award took place in Paris. 2 English judges, 2 others from the United States, and 1 Russian agreed to the demands of Great Britain and sentenced to expel Venezuela from almost 160,000 square kilometers of its legitimate territory. The Venezuelans did not even have a presence in the deliberations, as the powers involved agreed to exclude them, leaving the country without national representation, in a legal controversy in which it was the protagonist. Thanks to the extensive documentation gathered during the 20th century, today we know that this flawed sentence was not the result of a transparent process adhering to the law, but it was a political arrangement between Great Britain and Russia, who joined forces to pressure the United States to vote in favor of their expansionist designs under the threat of snatching Venezuela away. More territory. A British magazine wrote in a mocking tone that the little Venezuelan territory that had not been stripped away was not worth even a £5 note. After the enormous territorial dispossession in Paris, all the parties involved had benefited from the controversy except for Venezuela. In exchange for agreeing to arbitration, Great Britain achieved a favorable agreement with the United States. The Americans granted them the right of passage for their ships through the Panama Canal. And for their part, with this cession, the power. North Americans sought to keep the British Army neutral in the war they were preparing against Spain. Meanwhile, the Venezuelan government protested. But the country's political instability and its disadvantageous international position in the face of injustice allowed it nothing more than to raise ineffectual protests against the court's decision. Almost 6 decades passed from the flawed sentence of the Paris Arbitration Award to the Geneva Agreement. However, this does not mean that during those years the country remained idle. All Venezuelan governments, without exception, protested against the political agreement of 1899 and took actions about it. But perhaps the most important event that occurred during those years was the publication of the posthumous memorandum of one of the American lawyers who represented Venezuela in the arbitration. In this document, published in 1949, he stated that the litigation was unfair to Venezuela, that the country was stripped of a vast territory over which, in his opinion, Great Britain had no right, and that, as suspected, there was a political arrangement between Great Britain and Russia to disadvantage Venezuela. This document would prove crucial to the claim as it spurred new investigations into the flaws of the award from its publication. The following decades were decisive for the territorial dispute. During the 50s, the Perez-Jimenez government devised a plan to recover the lost territory. It strengthened the Venezuelan military presence on the border de facto. During the 60s, the claim was the most important issue that the governments of Romulo Betancourt and Raúl Leoni addressed in terms of foreign policy. In 1962, the British government was forced to examine the documents relating to the nullity of the award after an excellent presentation by the Venezuelan foreign minister at the United Nations. And a year later, in 1966, Venezuela, Great Britain and the newly emancipated Guyana signed the Geneva Agreement, where the nullity of the award and the right of Venezuela to claim the Exequatur were recognized. The agreement signed stipulated in its first article the creation of a Venezuelan-Guyanese Joint Commission with a duration of 4 years. The objective of this commission was to discuss and seek satisfactory solutions for both parties. Venezuela proposed a joint development plan for Guyana-Esequibo in Georgetown. But Guyana insisted on questioning the nullity of the award of 1899. Therefore, the Guyanese intransigence prevented the talks from heading towards success. Once again, Venezuela, trusting in international organizations, signed a document that did not offer the necessary guarantees for the resolution of the international dispute. Successive mistakes such as the signing of the Port of Spain Protocol or the inaction of the Venezuelan government. In the face of Rupu Nuni's rebellion, they relegated the territorial dispute to its extensive prolongation to this day. Thank you all very much for watching this video. We value every like and comment you leave us about our content. Remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new release. And if you want to read more supplementary material, follow us on our Instagram account.
See you next time.